Yes. No, I don't want to, I want to see the agenda. Why can't I? Why can't I? Sarah. I don't seem to. Manager Miller, I don't seem to have an agenda for the special meeting. So if you can prompt me for anything besides calling it to order and getting a roll call and, no, that's the regular, oh, it is the budget study. I'll share with you, thank you. Okay, Commissioner Garcia has come to my, so I'd like to call this special meeting, if everybody's ready, of the BCC budget study session to order at 12:12. I apologize for the late start. I know how much material we have to go over. Could I get a roll call?
Yes, Madam Chair. Commissioner Anna Hansen,
Present.
Commissioner Hank Hughes,
Present.
Commissioner Rudy Garcia, Commissioner Henry Roybal,
Excused?
and Chair Anna Hamilton.
I'm here. Thank you so much. So the next item is approval of the agenda. Thank you. But on that motion, are there any changes to the agenda?
No, Madam Chair, thank you.
Okay, great. So I have a motion.
Second.
I thank you. I have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. So we have an approved agenda. Item 2 are the presentations and discussions on budget development, and I'll turn it over to start to Manager Miller.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So Yvonne Herrera, our Finance Director, and I are going to share the presentation. In front of you, you have a PowerPoint of the presentation, and we'll start with that. We also have...
Is your mic on? Because I'm not hearing you
green.
through my earpiece.
Is that any better?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
I don't know if I have to hold it. Maybe I have to hold it right up to my face. So we have a PowerPoint presentation with summaries of much of the budget requests. And then we have attachments as well for all of the fixed asset replacement requests and FTE requests and other equipment, furniture, vehicles, all of that. And we're going to start off with Yvonne going through our budget calendar and where we are year to date and where we believe we will finish fiscal year 2022. And then I'll take the next segment, but we will be sharing the presentation. Also, for what we do with next year, budget proposal is really dependent on a good analysis of where we are for fiscal year 2022. And you will see that in some of the revenues that we have, really trying to tease out what does that look like on a recurring basis. So with that, I'll turn it over to Yvonne.
Madam Chair, Commissioners.
Madam Chair.
Excuse me, please.
I'd just like to recognize the Sheriff, Sheriff Mendoza, and his owner, Sheriff Mr. Johnson, just for being in the audience, and thank you for being here, Sheriff. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Commissioner. Director Herrera.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, are we ready to go? The only thing is presentation isn't, can you see the presentation on your screen? Okay. You can't hear me? Can you hear me now?
No, we
Better?
can hear you. I just,
Have to talk louder?
the presentation isn't,
Isn't showing up there? Okay.
well, it is,
Yeah.
it is now.
Okay. So the presentation, what you see in front of you is for the fiscal year 23 budget calendar, budget, different components of the process. On our budget calendar is, we basically start the budget process in January from looking at current year results and requesting departments to provide any additional requests that they may have through June 30th of the current year. And then we start preparing for the budget request for the following fiscal year. And that process begins in February. And I feel like I'm super loud, louder than, can you still hear me? Okay. So the departments and the elected offices will begin their budget process by looking at what their needs are, as well as what their goals and their desired outcomes, and will prepare that request for presentation to the finance division as well as the county manager, which we then hold budget hearings in March. And we also have committees review certain parts of the department's budget requests. Those items are the FTE requests, as well as IT-related requests, and then vehicle and equipment requests. After all is said and done, finance then looks at the entire budget and prepares revenue estimates to support those budget requests, as well as our debt service and any other operational items that isn't specifically tied to a department. And now we are in April, presenting presenting the department's budget requests to the board for review for any additional considerations. And then finally, we come to creating the interim budget for the county, which is due to the Department of Finance and Administration in June. In May, we request the board to approve the interim budget through a resolution. And I'm getting louder. Sorry, so.
You're right, everything is loud.
Right. And then we submit that interim budget to DFA in June. And then from there, we then make any additional adjustments, look at projections, since additional time has passed, to make sure that we have the most accurate information that we can use in projecting what our revenues will be, adjusting any department requests for any changes that have occurred. And then we prepare, the finance division will prepare a final budget, which will then be presented to the board as well for approval through resolution and submitted to DFA in July. And that is essentially our budget calendar, a long 6 months, but it definitely provides us with the appropriate amount of information and accurate information to be able to provide the departments with the funding that they need in order to do their operations in the following year. Our next slide is our tentative budget timeline. So during the month of March, we, as previously mentioned, we had our budget hearings, and now in April, we are at our first budget study session. Tentatively, we are looking at a second budget study session with requesting budget direction on the interim budget sometime in May. We do tentatively have a special BCC, potentially could have a special BCC meeting at the end of May to ask the board for approval of the interim budget for submission to DFA by that June 1st deadline. Our next slide is our DFA budget direction. So each year, DFA, Local Government Division, provides the local governments with budget direction for the upcoming fiscal year by proposing items to consider during that presentation. With COVID, I think it became more important to really take these into consideration to ensure that our expenditures were in line with the revenue that was reduced as a result of our closures. DFA's suggestions, the first one is adopting and applying a formal policy that strictly disallows reoccurring expenditures from cash balances and non-reoccurring revenues, as well as potentially implementing some kind of immediate freeze on all current vacant employee positions, with the exception of any health or public safety positions, as well as any increases to employee salaries, excluding any union contractual obligations. In addition to that, implementing an immediate freeze on any new non-essential contracts that may affect the general fund, which also has the 25% reserve requirement per local government division. And then finally, the discontinuation of the practice of providing funds to any nonprofit organizations that are not tied to a legislative appropriation. So based upon using or considering the DFA budget direction, we will be presenting the department's requests that is in line with what we project to be funded by revenue, as well as any reserves that are necessary to balance the budget. For the first couple of slides that we'll be going over, we'll go over the current year activity and results as of March 31st, and then we'll also provide projections through June 30th. And then, as Catherine mentioned, she'll go over the fiscal year 23 budget requests. So the first two slides that we'll cover is the March 31st results for both revenue and expenditures, and then the second set of slides will be for projections as of June 30th. For the June 30th projections, they were calculated based upon the prior 9 months' activity, as well as a 5-year history. Again, it's just estimates. We are expecting some fluctuations, particularly with revenue. It's still a little bit early to see some of the trends that we're seeing right now to see if they continue. We'll also be doing some additional analysis, specifically on GRT, to ensure that we don't overestimate or we don't grossly underestimate what those results will be. In addition to that, wanted to make a couple notes. The revenue projections do include, historically, we always present to the board the gross receipts tax in total, the gross receipts tax revenue in total, keeping in mind that some of those increments are for non-operational support, such as our capital outlay GRT and our first 1/8 hold harmless increment. In addition to that, we do have some GRT increments that were specifically that are specifically tied to operational activities such as fire, EMS, infrastructure. So while it's operational, it's specific to that type of operational activity. So the remaining GRT is then what we consider our general support. And finally, due to the ARPA funds having minimal activity, we decided to pull the budget amount out of the revenue amount so that it didn't skew the actual results to the budget amount. So what we are presenting is the operational grants as opposed to what their actual revenue is as of March, as well as what we project through June. Our first slide is our revenues as of March 31st. So the slide here has some history starting with fiscal year 19. We provide 19, 20, 21, and then we have our budget information for 22 as well as where we are at as of March. The reason why we wanted to provide the additional years in comparison is 2 of those years are impacted by COVID, whereas fiscal year 19 is our first year that was pre-COVID and would provide a better indicator of how the county's operations are. I wanted to point out a couple items on this slide, specifically the general property tax revenue. As of March, revenue is at $38 million, which is slightly above what it was as of March of 21, which lets us know that due to the delay in the first half property tax deadline, that the impact was only a delay in cash flow. So the total revenue for the first half was equal to or a little bit more than the first half of a normal tax year. As of fiscal year 19 revenues, we are actually over 100% of what we collected back in 19, again pre-COVID. Gross receipts, right now we are at $60 million. When we were budgeting, when we were calculating what the budget would be for GRT for fiscal year 22, we didn't project it to be as low as we did during the COVID year of fiscal year 20, but we did take into consideration that we still had limited closures, we still had mask mandates. So we had projected that we would be at $58 million for GRT for the fiscal year. As of March, we are now at $60 million, which is, again, over 100% of what we budgeted. And as you can see from fiscal year 20 and 21, you can see the impact that COVID had to our GRT revenue. Now, fiscal year 20 actually started out to be really, really good for the county. It would have been a record year had COVID not hit during those last 3-4 months of the year, which is when we started to actually see that GRT decline in collections. As you can see, lodger's tax has done really well this year. We are at almost $900,000, projecting to reach $1 million for fiscal year 22. Most likely due to all the activity that we had once the closures started ending, all of the traveling that was done, as well as now with all the upcoming events that are coming back online in person, we do expect that lodger's tax to be a greater record year than what it already is. Care of prisoners, if the board remembers, a bar was presented to them at the last BCC meeting to adjust the revenue as a result of our projections because of the vacancy rate with the detention officers. It wasn't a safe environment for the prisoners as well as the employees, so we made adjustments to what we thought that revenue would end up being, which is, I believe it was about $2.4 million. As a result of having to turn away prisoners, specifically with the U.S. Marshal's Office, we will see a significant reduction in the revenue for care of prisoners. And because we're still working on the detention center is still working on recruiting for those positions, we will be projecting a lower revenue for fiscal year 23 as well. The other area that's being impacted by our vacancies is our health insurance premiums. We projected to be about $10.6 million. Year to date is only at 6.4. As a result of the lower revenues, they will not be able, if claims continue to grow as we've seen in the past, they won't be able to support the current year claims, which means that we'll probably have to provide additional support to that fund through our reserve requirement. In addition to having to support that fund again this year, we still have to make up for $1.2 million from last year's reserve. Last year's reserve requirement showed that we were almost $1.8 million short in the reserve requirement per the county policy in the self-insurance fund, and the policy allowed us to allocate that. To use 3 years to fix that to fix that balance in the self-insurance fund, and last year we only did a third of that fix, and so we still have to do two additional, or at least 1.2 million in addition to what potentially it could be short this year. And finally, as I previously mentioned, the ARPA money on the grants line, that 11 million represents the operations, the reoccurring, frequent operational grants that the county receives. So we budgeted just under 12 million, and so far that we've received 7.2. So there's no ARPA money, there's no budget and no revenue yet in that line for the ARPA funds. We do expect to see at least 6 million in that line before year end for the reserve, for the revenue replacement portion that the board approved last year. Our next slide is our expenditures as of March. As you can see, the departments are about between 50 and 60% of what their budget amount was for the fiscal year. Some of that will be due to the vacancies that some of the departments have experienced. Some of it will be due to not being able to perform or to get certain services because of the demand, and as well as our projects having to be halted because we can't find somebody to help us with it, or halted because we have to find additional money to help fund because of the costs that are rising. As you can see, on the previous slide, we talked about the self-insurance revenue. We have our self-insurance claims, and as of March, they were at 6.9, which already the revenue of 6.4. 6.4? Yeah, 6.4. So right now, as of March, we're just a little bit shy of having enough revenue to cover those claims. So if we were to close the books, we would have to use whatever fund balance or cash balance we had to make up that difference. As you can see on the American Rescue Plan line, 2021 American Rescue Plan line, we budgeted 9 million of operational expenses. We did budget 14 million, but the remaining amount is related to projects, so that's not part of the operational results. So far, the departments have spent just over $100,000 in that. We do expect that activity to ramp up as we start adjusting the budgets for those projects that need additional funding due to those costs. We do expect to get the second half of the distribution sometime at the end of this year, and we will be looking to budget that amount in 23 and carry over unspent balances until I think we have through 24 to fiscal year 24 to obligate it, and we have through 26 to spend it all. Our next two slides are what we're projecting to be at June 30th. Apologize, flipped my slides wrong. For GRT, for property taxes, we looked at what the county's collection rate was for the first year of the tax being billed. In addition to that, we looked to see what the county's portion was of the total amount that was billed. Those percentages to project what we thought tax year 21 would look like as of June. So the county's collection rate for property tax is at 97% for that first year, and the county's portion of the total amount of property tax billed is 27%. So using those two numbers and looking at what we billed back in November, we're able to project that the county will be at about a $54 million property tax revenue for the general property tax. Gross receipts, as we talked about before, we're seeing quite a growth in that. Part of that growth, we believe there is some growth there, but we also believe that the increase is related to internet sales. Unfortunately, we're not able to isolate specifically how much internet sales are versus other sales. We did receive some additional information from Tax and Rev that we'll be using to do an analysis to see what kind of growth we should expect and we expect, how much we believe is internet sales versus local sales. So we're projecting gross receipts to be about 78 million. We did see a dip in March's receipt, which is based upon January activity, and that could have been due to all of the infections that occurred as a result of holidays. There were a lot of cases during January, so given that, we hope that that's why the dip occurred. As soon as we see the distribution now for April, we should either see it hopefully go back up or at least stay level with what we saw from January activity. As you can see, ambulance billing is at we projected to be at 1.7. Hopefully, we're hoping that becomes the ambulance. The fire department contracted out claims to help them with their billing process, as well as their collection process. So having that outsourced and having it timely will hopefully have that revenue be consistent from year to year. We're projecting our health insurance premiums to be at 8.6. And then, again, our grants don't include the ARPA money. Seen here of the 9.6 is just our UI, our housing grants, those grants that we tend to use every year or get every year. As far as our expenses go on the next slide, we see that most departments will be still under what we projected for 20. Our self-insurance, while our revenue for self-insurance is projected to be at 8.6 million, we're looking at expenses to be at 9.2, or those medical claims. Again, we'll have to, when we get closer to the year end, we'll have to look to see what that fund actually looks like and what kind of additional support it may end up needing to ensure that it has enough cash to support the claims as well as the reserve that's required by the policy. In addition, we hope to see expenditures, more expenditures under the ARPA plan. As of right now, we're only at 100,000, and hopefully some of the projects that we have allocated, we've allocated money to, we'll start to see more activity in those projects. And that is it for expenditures as of June 30th.
Thank you, Yvonne. Madam Chair, Commissioners, so on the next slide, this is FY 2023 projected revenues. These are preliminary numbers in many of the categories because we're still waiting on some information and some analysis on property taxes. For instance, we do have, and I've been working with the assessor, the county assessor, to get our numbers for next fiscal year. They've sent out notice of valuation, but one of the things they have to do are adjustments, exemptions, and that type of thing, and they're working on those. But we do believe that our property tax values will have a significant increase in valuation this year. Some preliminary numbers that he gave me were that our residential net change will be about 541 million, non-residential net change to the good, 243 million, and new construction for residential of about 324 million, and new construction of non-residential of about 57 million. So all of that will factor into our revenue projections for property tax. The problem is, as you know, we have a state formula that gets applied to property taxes, and that is yield control. So they do actually control what we receive off of net increases in existing value. New construction gets taxed at the full rate, but any existing construction is capped at 3% on assessment, and then it also runs through a yield control formula, which keeps the revenue down or I should say, keeps the revenue from fluctuating for local governments. In times of high increases in property value, it keeps the actual tax rate down, lowers the rate, and in times of decreased value, it increases the rate, but with the ultimate goal of limiting the yield and controlling the yield that the local government gets. So you will never see in our property taxes big swings. You'll see this maybe a couple $1 million growth, maybe a couple million less, but not huge swings like you can see in gross receipts tax. It's a stable revenue source, but it does not grow rapidly, even if property values are skyrocketing. New construction, though, hopefully we will see some higher number than what we have in the budget estimate. We're, from FY21's actuals to FY22's, where we had thought we'd be pretty flat and maybe have some recession. What we're finding is people are paying more promptly. So we typically would get 97, 98% first-year collection, full collection on what's billed. What we've seen this year, and we saw it right off the bat, was prepayment of property taxes, probably some of the higher revenues we've ever had in July, August timeframe. And now we're also seeing almost a 99% first-year payment rate, which is great. And also the efforts of our county treasurer's office in prior year collections. So that's going to, all of that information from the assessor about new values and appraised values after he gives us any of the exemptions that need to come out of those properties that are protested, come out of those values until that's resolved. So that number's going to change, but we're giving you that right now as kind of a, if we were to be able to collect next year exactly what we had this year. I anticipate that to go up, though, based on the preliminary numbers. Same with debt service, works the same way, more value, more revenue, especially new value, but our debt is what drives that rate, how much debt service payments we have. In November of this year, we do plan to go to the voters, so we do plan in July to bring a proposal to the board for general obligation bonds, but we would still target revenues to cover our debt service and debt service to keep our rate at the same 2.12 mils for county debt service rate. Also in our valuation fund, revenues in the valuation fund are driven by property values. It's a 1% fee that goes into the assessor's valuation fund based upon assessed value and taxable value and what we collect. So that will move, that, but all three of those numbers will fluctuate based on the final values that we receive from the assessor's office. Payment in lieu of taxes, we don't have that as a projected, but it's pretty standard that what we receive year over year is similar to the year before. That's a calculation done by the federal government based on our federal lands. Clearly, it doesn't come anywhere near what it costs us to have federal lands in our, and what we would have received if those had been taxed at the rate of residential or even non-residential property in Santa Fe County. Gross receipts, this is a tough one. As Yvonne mentioned, we're having this year that I think is kind of blowing everybody away. In July, the state went from source-based to destination-based on internet sales and on how GRT is collected and the rate at which is applied to goods and services that are purchased. Our first collection was in August, and we did see a bump in our GRT for that, but it kind of stayed high, and then when January's distribution, which came in March, we saw it drop back down. Now, not back down to pre-internet, because prior to that, we did not receive revenue on internet sales. So we have started to receive it, but as Yvonne said, we're not privy to that tax data. We do not get data by taxpayer. We can get industry tax data, so we can look at the trends in retail sales industry and see, was that going up? Has it continued to go up? Did it just go up in our August distribution and kind of stay steady? So we're breaking down our tax distributions by industry, and we're looking for trends so we can figure out what can we count on as a recurring revenue stream. Because this looks great that we're up $20 million, but a lot of that's also attributed to post-pandemic activity. For instance, the month of December was kind of outrageous, and a lot of people traveled in December because Delta was starting to come back down, and it was right before Omicron hit. And what you see is the month of December, our distribution is significantly higher than other months and higher than other Decembers as a percent year over year. So that's one hard thing to determine. Also, how much of this revenue is based on inflation right now? We're at 8.5%, 9% inflation. So will that revenue, so everything, I don't think there's a thing we're purchasing, food, gas, you name it, that isn't at some of its highest prices ever. But how much of that is sticky inflation? So will those sales stay at that level because that's the new norm, or will that also drop off? Additionally, because of high inflation and an inverted yield curve, there's a belief that there will be a recession. So the first thing to pull back when we have a recession is our gross receipts tax revenue. So it's really important in estimating that number that we have something that we can count on as recurring, because this would be the type of revenue source that funds pay increases, benefit increases, new FTEs, and those recurring expenditures that we have year over year. Overestimating the revenue in that area and then budgeting that out to salaries and benefits and recurring programs puts us in a position of having to retract it and do hiring freezes or forced vacancy rates if that revenue is not there long term. So we're working at breaking down that data, analyzing it as best we can. This number of the 66 million was based on looking at a growth factor somewhere in between what we saw this year of 30 plus percent, 35%, and our regular 2 or 3% growth. That's estimated at about 15% growth, but I anticipate that number is also going to change when we put a budget recommendation in front of you. Hold harmless distributions, the preliminary number of 2.9 million, that's purely based on what is our estimated hold harmless collection this year, less 7%. The state statute reset the declining rate, and they said we're starting next year at 49% of what your hold harmless distribution would be, and then it reduces at 7% per year for the next 7 years. So in 7 years, that number will be 0. And to remind the board what that is that when tax was taken off, when grocery receipts tax was taken off food and medical services, the state promised to hold local governments harmless. So they calculated what our local options would be at the time if we had received that GRT using our local options, not the state's 5 1/8, not the city's, the city's portion is the city's portion, but to us, if it's 1.75% in the county, not in the city limits, that it's county, and it's on food, they still distribute to us 1.75% of that sale. Over time, though, in 2015 or in 2013, they enacted a law that said we're going to decrease that distribution over a 15-year period. We'll give you 3 hold harmless increments of 1/8 that you can put in place to replace that revenue as we decrease your distribution. So we're now at about 50% of what we would have received had they not taken the tax off of food and medical services. And so that equates to about $3 million. And over the next 7 years, that will decrease by 7%. Now, you may see some growth in it because if food prices continue to go higher, you're going to have growth in the base cost and the total sales. So it may not decline at a perfect 7%, but statutorily, they will be decreasing it by 7%. Other taxes and assessments, we're estimating at the moment the same revenues that we had budgeted for FY22. There may be, as we get closer to the end of the fiscal year, a little bit of wiggle room in that one to somewhere between $1.8 and $2 million. Lodgers tax, we are estimating having about the same revenue as 2022. We don't have any, so Bishop's Lodge was one of our main lodging facilities that did come online this year, and we're seeing revenue from that. We pretty much only have a couple of hotels in the county, and then the rest is from Airbnbs and short-term rentals that are providing lodgers tax. Then on care of prisoners, we also are not estimating back to our pre-pandemic revenue levels. This is all dependent on our staffing levels at the jail. We have a contract with the U.S. Marshals. We've typically had a population of about 100 U.S. Marshals on a regular basis. Their current per diem rate's about $80 a day. So just U.S. Marshals, we end up with $3 to $4 million in revenue from U.S. Marshal contract, but right now we do not have any U.S. Marshal inmates in due to staffing levels. When we get the facility staff back up, we'll start to bring back the U.S. Marshals. In addition, we are submitting to the BOP, or Bureau of Prisons, a potential change to our per diem rate to be more in line with our actual expenditures. But right now, that's a fairly conservative estimate based on having a partial year of getting all of the other inmates, or all of the U.S. Marshal inmates, as well as other jurisdictions that house their inmates with us. We've seen a lower number just across the board. And that's county inmates as well as other entities that we house inmates for. Utility charges, this is based upon our current rate and any rate changes we have, and our customer base and our average usage. In employee health premiums, as Yvonne mentioned, this is tricky. Premiums, revenue side is totally driven by how many employees you have. If you're down 20% in staffing, you're likely to be down 20% in premiums. That does not necessarily translate, however, into being down in claims. Typically, your claims are based on whether you have a small number of large claims, and you can have that small number of large claims that eat into your eat into your revenues, regardless of whether you have 800 employees or you have 1,000 employees. So we're going to be meeting with the broker to try to get a better estimate on our what we need to be doing with our health premiums. As you noticed in the projections to year end, our claims look like they will exceed premiums at the moment. So that would translate into probably a proposed change in our health insurance premiums, but hopefully it won't have to be a drastic one. Also on low-rent housing, that's our HUD funding and HUD revenues. Other charges for service includes, this includes funding for the, just make sure I get the right one. This is like our solid waste permits. We have not, we put a cap on the increase of those, and we've seen a pretty significant decline in those revenues. These also include, I think this one does not, which one? Clerk fees, yeah, sorry, clerk fees. And those have been, our clerk fees have been pretty consistently increasing. So this number also may go up based upon the last 4 years of, based on the last 4 years of actual revenues. License permits and fees, this is the land use permits. Right now, this does not have an estimate for doing short-term rentals included in it, but if the board does approve an ordinance that we hope to put in front of you here in the next couple of months for publishing title and general summary, and it would have a application fee and a permit fee, and we would adjust revenues if that proposal passes with the board. Then grants, as Yvonne said, we did not include the ARPA grant. How we've handled the revenues for the ARPA grant, while we received 14.6 million already, we don't actually, we consider that as deferred revenue. As we expend the funds, then we have the expenditure as well as the revenue recorded. So we're not estimating anything in there right now. We also anticipate when we have the revenue replacement, which the board had allocated $6 million last year, or $6 million this year, $6 million next year, that we would also place that revenue in for revenue replacement. And I think interest income, investment income, that's a challenging one as well. We're still in a really low interest rate environment. In our good years, we've had over $5 million. We actually have more to invest, but the interest rates are still incredibly low. So, and as investments are maturing, the Treasurer's Office is investing and trying to kind of ride the increase of the yield curve, not investing out too far, but we're really going to have to work with the Treasurer's Office to see if the portfolio is going to change significantly enough in order to up that revenue stream. Any questions on those revenue projections? I think
No, it's a lot of, you go ahead.
I was going to say my main thing about that is I just want to let you know these are not definitive numbers by any means. We have a lot of variables that we're still sorting through in order to determine whether those numbers would push up a little higher. I don't see any of them coming lower in our estimates, but there is still information that we need in order to push them up higher over our estimates from this year.
No, this is excellent, and, you know, I'm so appreciative of the approach you take. Like, these are conservative but realistic with all of the assumptions just laid out there so that we can anticipate the things that would contribute to changes, and you've stated the things that you're continuing to look for. to evaluate those changes, and I think that's just excellent. So, Commissioner Hughes, I'll just go around to whoever has questions.
Yeah, I just have a general question, which I think I know the answer to, but based on what you've said, but it's interesting you started out with the DFA budget direction, but it seems like we're not in that situation where we have to freeze positions or any of the other things on the list. Is there anything that DFE is suggesting that we do need to do?
I don't think so, Madam Chair, Commissioner Hughes. I don't think we're going to have to do those type of measures unless we were to see something drastic happen the other way. You know, that with the situation in Ukraine, with the increase in gas prices, with inflation, you know, we're constantly thinking, well, what could that do to us in, 6 months, a year, or whatever. So as we review these, what can we count on in lieu of some catastrophic situation is where we try to start to say, okay, this I know if we built a budget to these revenues, I am not concerned that even if we have these fluctuations that we'll be able to live within this budget. I think a lot of those were kind of the things that we did during the beginning of the pandemic in order to make sure that we could withstand those significant decreases at the end of fiscal year 2020 and the beginning of fiscal year 2021. And so we've been moving away from all of that. We don't have any more hiring freezes. All positions are funded. 5 of our 6 union contracts were renegotiated with increases to pay, with still working on different hiring incentives. So we've been moving out of all of those measures. We're not restricting travel anymore. As Yvonne said, in mid-year we increased budgets where we knew we needed more money for gas or materials, that type of thing. So we put that out there because we wanted you to understand what guidance we are given from DFA, but I don't think we'll need to do any of those measures.
Okay, great, thank you. And wow, I sound really loud.
Everybody does.
I agree with Commissioner Hamilton. It's good to see a nice conservative estimate of something we're sure we can live within. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other questions? So,
I have some questions, Madam Chair.
okay, Commissioner Garcia?
I don't know where to start. But,
Just,
Well, we're not on the expenditure side yet.
right, so
So if it's about expenditures.
That's where I'm going, but we'll do that next meeting. But however, Yvonne, Mr. Dead on your staff, and Manager Miller, see, you get it. Our budget is roughly about almost $400 million. That's for the capital projects, so on and so forth. We have a budget about almost $300 million is our operating budget, and so this is actually a very important, for lack of a topic that we as policymakers up here, my colleagues here, that we need to, that this is just an informational item, and as into, we have a triple rating. Manager Miller has done an excellent job in this, for many years, and your staff. But one of the things is that it's important to me is we have public safety, we have public works department, we have behavioral health stuff. You're actually giving us a presentation as into where we're going to go, right? And once again is, the tax assessor, Gus, has done an excellent job as in for valuation, because that's how we get valuation. That's you cut the pie up for schools, everything else, community colleges, whatever else. But you and your staff have done an excellent job. Manager Miller, I'm not gonna toot your horn yet because But in regards to the projections. Who does the projections for us as into the GRT tax and what we're going to do and where we're going to need to invest in the next 2 or 5 years?
So, Madam Chair, Commissioner Garcia, our finance department has 20-plus years of data in our GRT, and that's what we base a lot of our projections on is historical. But as I said, this year is such an anomaly that we're trying to figure out where that growth is. A lot of it is in construction. We've seen an increase in construction, and we can get that data from tax and rev, but it's by industry. We can get within the county by industry. We can compare that with the state and industries within the state to see if a particular industry is doing as well in Santa Fe County as it is doing statewide. But as far as getting any more detailed information about our gross receipts tax, it's very difficult. So we have to predominantly use historical data and trends, and then look for information that would help us determine if there's some other factors. And that's why I was saying for GRT for next year, I could just say to you guys, oh, well, we're getting 78 million this year, so we're going to get another 5% growth next year, and we're going to get 80-some million. But I think that would be an irresponsible estimate because it's not necessarily based on recurring activity. There's a lot of post-pandemic activity that may not be sustainable. And so we're trying to tease out in that line in particular how much of that growth between 22 and 23 can we, or between 21 and 22, can we count on as recurring? So that the recommendation to the board for recurring expenditures is tied to something that we believe is recurring on the revenue side.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Manager Miller. A couple other questions I have is in regards to the COVID, regarding DFA, the 25%. Is that what we're required to actually have?
So for reserves,
Yes. I thought reserves were 10% out of our budget.
so we have a statutory requirement with DFA for our reserves, but the Santa Fe County Board of County Commissioners has approved a policy that sets a different level of reserves. Not only do we meet our 25% reserves, we have other reserves for contingencies, like economic downturn, uninsured losses, catastrophic losses due to floods or natural disasters, and fixed asset or infrastructure issues that we may have that are unanticipated. So the board sets those. We also have in our health insurance fund, we have goals for a different reserve in our health insurance premiums in case we have significant claims and not the premiums to cover it. We have a 50% reserve in our utilities department, and then we have other, I believe it's 25% on anything that we have salaries. So where we have recurring expenditures such as salaries and benefits, we have 25% reserves in those funds. That would be like corrections where we pay salaries of the detention officers. It's like road fund, things like that. So they're all different, but it's based on a policy adopted by the Board of County Commissioners.
Thank you, Madam
And we
Chair.
set those, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, Commissioner Garcia, we set those in between when we do the interim budget and the final budget. Yvonne calculates a number within those ranges that the board set in the policy, and we bring those back to set them definitively. At that time, we also move from the general fund to those other funds to make sure we're meeting the proper reserves.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Manager Miller. And in regards to the debt services as well as the GRT and the projections for the 1.2 mils, as you obviously see this stuff, and you see where we're going to be at in 5 or 10 years from now. And in regards to the 1.2 mills, as you mentioned earlier, that the state legislature controls, so are we going to be okay with that? Are we?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Garcia, so there's a couple things. The state has their debt service rate. That's if you open up your tax bill, the very first rate is what the state's debt is. So in general election, when you're voting on higher education facilities, libraries, senior centers, those are their typical questions. They do similar to what we do. They take assessed values from across the state and they try to keep that rate that's assessed on an individual home about the same. We do the same with our financial advisors. We take all of the assessed value within the boundaries of Santa Fe County and we say, if we back into a number that we can go out to the voters for bonds by keeping, we have two knowns. The known is what are the values? What are the assessed values in the county? And what's the rate we want to keep? If we have a new bond and it's $20 million over 20 years or 10 years or whatever, what is my debt service going to be? My $2.12 per $1,000 of taxable value, what is that going to, how much money can I then generate in a bond? So we bring that to you the summer before, by July, we bring that number to you to vote on whether you want to go to the voters for that amount of money. So that's, it's driven by those two factors. But we try to keep the same rate.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. One of the other things, Madam Chair, Manager Miller, your staff that's sitting out here, you have a lot of knowledge. You know that. And all you learn from her because she's good. But one of the things that I actually want to just is regarding our budget as into for the healthcare premium for our employees.
I know you never want it
Great
to
job.
go up,
I know,
Commissioner
but
Garcia.
we've done, you know, you get it. But all of our county employees, excellent job. From public safety to public works to you all, us, whatever else, it's a great job. And in regards to the tax assessor, Mr. Gus Martinez, so I talked to him about 6 or 8 months ago as in regards to the evaluation rate as into whenever COVID happened. We thought we would change the what I don't want to call it the mill levy, however else, but we didn't. But the valuation in Santa Fe County has just gone escalated, and so our valuation is almost $1 billion more than we had the last 2 or 3 years. So that's just something I just want to bring up because obviously you see a lot of development going up in the county of Santa Fe, so it's kind of, so just wanted to bring that up. But
Thank you, Commissioner. So we can go on to the next piece of the pie. I'd like to make sure we can move this along so we get all the information in before. And you guys are doing a great job of that. I really appreciate it.
So the big piece of the pie is the, Madam Chair, is the budget requests and then all of the things that we need to try to fit within those estimated revenues. And like I said, the revenue projection is still moving, but by the time we're in front of you in 2 weeks again, we have to have that number more solidified. And in addition, the numbers in front of you for the department requests are as submitted by the departments. We have not made any adjustments to any of those. But as you can see, there's probably some areas that we can, because if you look just at what departments have requested, and then you look at where we're projected to be on expenditures by the end of June 30, 2022, as well as where we have been the prior 3 fiscal years before that, you have several departments that have had excess budget. We use that excess budget to do our one-time purchases for fixed assets and equipment and vehicle purchases, IT purchases, and other capital requests. But just so you can see, you can tell that we actually anticipate by the end of 2022 having a significant amount less in expenditures than budget, but even more notable is the difference year over year where we typically end up being. One thing I would point out on this, I don't really need to go into any detail on this request. Most of the departments where they could did request flat budgets. We saw increases obviously in fuel costs, utility costs, travel, now that most of the departments want to be able to go back to training and travel out of town, not everything virtually. And then some other operational supplies. So a lot of the increase in requests had to do with that. What we have not dropped into this at all is any kind of cost of living increases, FTEs, or compensation. What we've done is just taken positions we currently have at whatever they are currently being paid at, and if they're vacant, then a midpoint. So none of that has been incorporated in the department request. But what is in the department request is what salaries are now, as well as anything that the departments and elected offices requested in their operating budgets. Just to note at the bottom, when you look at projected, why you have such a big difference between FY 2022 budget of $265 million and then the TBDs. There are two TBDs. That's how much of the rescue plan we would put into the budget for, as I said, because we don't record it till we expend it, except for the revenue replacement funding. And then also fund transfers, we don't put those in until we don't know what that number is until we've developed the budget. And what I mean by fund transfers is transferring from the general fund over to road fund, over to corrections fund, over to any of the other funds in the county, the sheriff's fund, the fire department funds. Those transfers get counted as a general fund revenue, but then they're also counted as two expenditures, a general fund expenditure going from the general fund into the department, and then that revenue into the department. So transfers show up twice.
Could I ask a quick clarification question? So these budget requests don't include additional FTEs requests from
No,
departments?
they're in a separate slide.
And they don't include any changes in compensation, but it's still higher than the preliminary revenue estimate, true?
Madam Chair,
it
you are
doesn't-
very astute, yes. But they also include, if you notice, Madam Chair, if you notice, though, on what our actual expenditures are in prior years, if you notice actual expenditures to what's being requested, there's a lot of room.
Yes.
So that's
recognize that,
that's the job that Yvonne and her staff, in coordination with the departments, where we go in and go, okay, what are the real priorities in here? Because in budget requests, everybody puts in fluff. Everybody asks for what they hope they can do for the year. But in reality, they can't usually do everything in a given year. In addition, we budget 100% of salaries and benefits.
Right.
So those are areas that we can go in, and I don't know if you recall last year when we put the budget together, and Yvonne and her staff did a very astute job at going in and cutting To the tune of about $2 million, $1.8 million, and everybody was panicked. Well, nobody suffered from those cuts in the sense of that they weren't able to make it through the year. The areas that they weren't able to make it through the year, we've managed to bring those to you in already adjusted budgets. So we'll be going through that process. Just to give you some of the highlights, though, so every department pretty much takes their existing budget for the current year, and they put everything in the next year's budget request that they know is going to be a repeat. So I'm not going to go through every individual department request, just some highlights. But the things that are in the numbers that you saw, most of it is salary and benefits. You know, that's 70% of a department's budget, maybe 80%. And in some cases, it can be 90% or more of their budget is just salary and benefits. Some of the bigger budgets have flexibility in programmatic requests. And what we do, though, is any software that they currently have, any supplies they already buy, any materials they already buy, those move into the next year. Usually they build from those requests unless they didn't need something. So that's in all the base budget. And then these things are some things just to point out over the next several slides that have been asked for that maybe are either new or recurring, but a large portion of their operating budget. In the assessor's office, we moved from doing the flyovers every 4 years to every 2 years, and now we're on an every year schedule, but we had a 6 or 8 year contract to do it, so we're able, and we split that cost with the assessor from general fund and the assessor's valuation fund, but that's $314,000. But what that's enabled the assessor to do is to get from, when I got here almost 12 years ago, we were not current. You're supposed to revalue all countywide every 5 years statutorily. We were not in compliance with that. We had to catch up to that and do a total valuation of the county. What he's been able to do with his staff and using this technology is get us down to about a 3.5 year cycle, which means our assessments are very current using that technology. And he needs less staff, less vehicles, less gas to go out into the field. He put a focus on professional development and certification, and also is requesting a new CAMA system. That will be a very expensive endeavor if the board decides to approve something like that. It's probably somewhere between $3 and $5 million over a couple years, and that would be changing the tool within the assessor's office as well as the treasurer's through to the clerk's office and into the finance department in order to do it properly and make sure that assessments and taxes and recording and everything is done consistently across departments and offices. Treasurer's office, they're one of those budgets that's predominantly salary and benefits, but they do want to focus on employee professional development with a $28,000 request for training and development. Sheriff's office, also, most of the cost is in staff and benefits. We just negotiated a new contract, but then in the news this morning, I read that the city of Santa Fe is looking at 8% increases with as much as almost 16% in total compensation package to their police department. So obviously that's going to be an area we need to look at, making sure we stay competitive in all of our unions with the city, with Los Alamos, and with private industry and our surrounding counties and municipalities. The major request typically out of the sheriff's office is our patrol vehicles and their fleet, but we have consistently budgeted for replacement of about 15 vehicles. I think one year we dropped it down due to economic downturn with the COVID, and then once before, but we do standard of about 30 vehicle replacements for them. Under the clerk's office, the new clerk is very ambitious and has a lot of new initiatives that she would like to undertake. But one of the main ones that we're doing is trying to remodel the west end of the detention facility. She was successful in lobbying our legislators in getting some money to help assist with that, as well as some of the equipment to go in there. About $100,000 in there for election costs, much of which we get reimbursed from the Secretary of State, but she's working on a robust voter alert software, which is ballot tracking, and desk call center, sample ballots, help desk, upgrade of $100,000, real-time solutions for a hand tally system for elections of $100,000, bulletproof glass and panic buttons, $20,000, marriage kiosk of $16,000. In the probate judges, budget request, was very frustrated with her. She once again requested $42,953, and I think it's been the same forever. So now pretty much just some supplies and salaries is about all that goes in that budget. That's our, it gets the big green light though, because there's not much to look at there. Under the county manager's office, we have $90,000 for county website services. The county manager's office does control the county's website and does upgrades for and updating of pages for the rest of the county. So that's what that's for. And then also, as you know, we talked about putting the strategic plan online. So we're looking for a software system to do that. IT's looking for our replacement of laptops and desktops. We call it the Cascade. They are on a 3 to 5 year cycle for those. And one of the biggest things, that big budget item for the county is all of our software licenses, particularly for Microsoft and some of the other countywide systems. Then in legal, we'd like to get to a place of getting a records management consultant to help us move our hard records that are down in Albuquerque at a place called Iron Mountain. It's not the annual storage that's the problem. It's retrieving a box at $65 each way that costs us so much. And if you saw how many requests we have for permits, it's a lot of boxes that we are pulling back and forth. And we'd like to create a system at the juvenile detention facility to manage our own paper records, as well as digitizing as much as we can. And we're looking for a consultant to help map out that project, because it'll be a substantial project. And then attorney's fees for outside consultants of $300,000. In finance, our audit services run about $250,000 a year, and we are working on an e-procurement software that I think we're in the process of acquiring the software, but it would have an annual maintenance cost of around $25,000. Tuition reimbursements in HR, $15,000, and to continue encourage people to go to EDGE classes for continuing education of $5,000 countywide. Then in community development department, we don't have a whole lot of history. This is, as you know, a new department this year, so there's not a lot of comparable from previous years. They were part of growth management, part of the housing, and part of the public works. And so the two big things in there are $500,000 for energy efficiency programs and the stormwater management. This is our MS4 permit. We estimate that's going to probably run about $180,000 a year for the next couple of years. In lodger's tax, we're looking at upping our advertising campaign. We typically do around $300,000. This will probably even continue to go up. We have a requirement, statutory requirement, for some of those funds to be spent within 2 years of collection. So we'll be watching that and whether we increase our advertising in lodger's tax. economic development, they have a lot of initiatives that they would like to work with on workforce training and short-term rental compliance, business workshops, but about 460,000 and then 175 for broadband. I anticipate we will have other requests for broadband projects as they're identified. And then our film program, 300,000. The board and the city council approved an increase to the contributions to the film office, and that's a total of 150,000 a year each party, up to 175,000 in that agreement, and we do have cash balance as well. Affordable housing. This is just what's in the current budget for down payment assistance. Happy Roofs, 150,000, but I anticipate as we move forward with the affordable housing plan, we may have some adjustments to that as well. And then under our public housing, these are some of our same programs that you see every month Jordan report on. In community services, senior and community relations operations, 612,000 from area agency on aging. That's all we receive in federal funds compared to the 3 to 4 million though that we do spend for our seniors program. NMSU, this is a three-way contract between NMSU, the state, and the county to provide extension services. Our share is 152,000 plus the offices that we provide. Connect, we're looking at 975,000. Navigation services, almost 1.2 million, and behavioral health of 2.1 million. DWI, 1.5 million, and local law enforcement agencies, $80,000 in DWI assistance. Then in growth management, open space conservation efforts through contractual services. These are Commissioner Garcia's favorite studies on bats and pinyon jays and the natural resources on our open space properties. 240,000 sustainable land development code. We're looking at an online permitting system with annual maintenance and also some fixed asset costs and short-term rental monitoring enforcement efforts. That's to make sure when we do get everybody with a short-term rental license that we can enforce collections on GRT and lodger's tax. And then GIS, professional development, and then King's Map restoration. You'll have to get Earl to tell you about this. It's pretty amazing. But we're estimating that'll be about $20,000. And then also looking at a joint project with the assessor's office on layering all that fancy data they have with GIS. In public safety, RECC contract for medical director is $30,000. Our P25 Motorola radio updates, the estimate we have right now from Motorola is about $861,000. Radio system maintenance of $155,000, and temp staffing until we can get all of our positions filled. We're still using temp agency services. Not ideal, but at least we have some of our former employees coming back and working part-time under temp services. Fire overtime is always a large cost for the county. It's estimated to be $1.3 million. About $400,000 to $500,000 of that, though, is just built into their regular base schedules because they work a 29, 12, 28-day shift. Then we also are looking at creating a new cost center for our fire prevention and our ambulance billing. We pay a contractor about $96,000 to do our billing and go collect on that. And it's a percentage of what they actually bill and collect. Then corrections, as I said, are typically where we would be on care of prisoners is something north of $4.5 million, but we're thinking we'll probably only have about $2.4 million. We'd like to also replace the body scanner that you saw on the tour last week. There's newer technology in addition to that. Scanner, I believe, is about 9 years old. Still working, but would be a good time to replace it. And then also stab-proof vests. We've started the procurement of those with some funding we had left over in HR for safety supplies, and that $27,000 would complete purchasing those for all of the staff. And then just our regular inmate care services, the cost to those. Public Works. Hope this is my last one. Yes, Public Works, probably also one of the biggest departments. Public Safety, Public Works, our largest part of our budget. But under Fleet, we have increased maintenance costs and GPSing of all of our county vehicles. Traffic engineering, increased maintenance costs. What we're seeing is all of the materials have gone up 25, 30%. And then our landfill tipping fees, as you know, will have increases due to the increased costs at the SWAMA from $100 to $150 for recycling per ton. And I think also another $2.50 per ton of regular refuse. We have a lot of requests for vehicle and heavy equipment replacement. And in property control, as you know, we're leaving the Tasuki transfer station at the end of June, and we did put some funding in order to do restoration there of the vegetation where we have had vehicles. And we're also looking at a countywide assessment of all of our facilities to identify all those areas that we have deficiencies in maintenance or deferred maintenance that needs to be addressed immediately. Utilities, we've seen a big increase in utilities. So within their building space needs, they have almost $1 million for utility expenses for utilities county-wide. And road maintenance, this is a big budget. We typically transfer around $5 million or more over to the road maintenance fund from the general fund. This year, they've requested $7.4 million in total. And what they've been trying to do is build up with their equipment operators a team that doesn't just maintain our roads, but also has the ability to pave roads, chip seal, do asphalt overlay, and that saves us money in contracting out for those road improvements. And then in utilities, you'll see our BDD operations and maintenance, and we tend to try to match the BDD budget, but we will likely have some buffer within our own utility budget in case BDD's budget is not sufficient and requires an increase, which just translates into an increase for both the partners in the utility. So we keep that in mind when we're setting up their budget and make sure that we have room in our revenues to expenditures in case of increased costs at BDD. And then a cost that we have not had, but will be in front of you later today, is the wheeling fee costs. We had a wheeling fee that we paid, then we prepaid a wheeling fee. That prepayment expired at the end of 2020 with the right for the city of Santa Fe to charge us a wheeling fee through that part of their system that they wheel water for us to our system. Right now, this is just an estimate of $770,000 in there. Heavy equipment of over $1 million, and sludge disposal at our wastewater facility of $262,000. So those are the highlights of the department requests. And now I'm going to turn it over to Yvonne to go through compensation consideration.
Thank you, Yvonne.
Chair Hamilton, Commissioners. So this next slide, if I can get to it. So these are some proposals for employee compensation and items that we are required to do beginning 7/1. The first one are cost of living adjustments. We did a calculation of 3 different scenarios, 1, 2, and 3% COLA across the county, at a cost of the 1% being $730,000, all the way to the 3% being $2.2 million. In addition to a potential cost of living adjustment, we also have the class and compensation study that we've heard a little bit about. We should be seeing the result of that study here soon. We weren't sure what to expect for that study, so we did some different calculations on potential adjustments that we would need to do per position throughout the county, or I'm sorry, it would be AFSCME employees and non-bargaining unit employees. And then we have medical and dental increases. We are still waiting for information from our contractor Gallagher on additional information as to how the current year looks. We have calculated several scenarios with that one as well. Effective July 1st, we have Santa Fe County itself has a 5% or a 0.5% increase required on parent contributions. The law was passed back in 2020 and was delayed for local governments until fiscal year 23, and then we will be seeing 1 of 4 increases to our parent contributions. And then, if you remember from last year's budget study sessions and the interim budget and the final budget, we had come up with a plan to increase the minimum hourly rate for our county employees who are making less than $15. We still have we have 40 employees currently that are below $15. So that last item is to bring the rest of those employees up to at least the $15 at a cost of $80,000. For the cost of living adjustment, we did calculations based upon bargaining unit, and that's what the next couple of slides show. So we are providing the calculation by those 3 different percentages, the 1, 2, and 3, being effective January 1 of 23. So we have the first 6 months that would impact that would impact fiscal year 23, and then the last 6 months that would impact fiscal year 24. And then we've also provided the total cost for that COLA over a calendar year period for each of the bargaining units. And we come to the class and comp study. So the county contracted with Keystone International to work with the county to look at our positions and how they compare to the market for the AFSCME positions as well as the non-bargaining unit positions. By doing, they sent out a questionnaire for employees to fill out for what their duties are, the different duties that they do throughout the day, throughout the month, throughout the fiscal year, as well as additional questions such as whether they supervise, what kind of equipment they use, so forth and so on. And Keystone has taken that information and has analyzed it and is working on their draft report to the county. So without additional information, we just kind of wanted to throw out some potential calculations, and the calculations that we're presenting are straight across, assuming that every position is not to market value at the same rate. So considering that some positions may be at a higher discrepancy while others may not be. But if we just assumed everybody the adjustment was equal amongst all employees, for just salary alone, so we chose a 5, 10, and 15% adjustment. For just salaries by itself, at a 5% adjustment across all those employees, it would cost the county $1.7 million to make those adjustments. And then because it's in 5% increments, obviously it's going to double and triple based upon those 3 different scenarios. Now, when we factor in the benefits, which is all the taxes, para, and retiree health care, for a 5% adjustment, we're looking at $2.2 million that would potentially, we would have to figure out how we would do those adjustments, how we would fund those adjustments, because those would be reoccurring costs for the county. So again, without seeing what the report looks like and knowing exactly how each position is compared to the market, it could be we're estimating between that 1.7 and that 15% of $6.7 million to adjust county positions to market value. And then our next slide, we have our health and dental costs. We've been talking a little bit about it today, about our revenue is not completely supporting our claims for this fiscal year. We are still waiting additional information from Gallagher, the county's contractor, on how the current calendar year looks for our insurance claims versus our revenue. So taking calendar years 22 rates that are currently in place and just doing a 2%, 3%, and 5% increase to those rates for the county, as well as the employees, those are the costs that we are projecting based upon those scenarios for partial year of fiscal year 23, and then for the first half of fiscal year 24. So if the county needed to do a 2% increase, the county would see a $221,000 increase in insurance and dental costs, and for the employee, that would equate to a $40,000 increase. If we had to go up to 5%, it would be $361,000 for the county, whereas the employee, it would be $102,000 increase across the county's county employees overall. And I'll stand for any questions that you may have on any of those potential options that are available for the board to consider.
Thank you, Yvonne. Just for clarification on the class and comp study, this is not to imply that once the full study is out, there might, because I think you said this, but just for clarification, that there might be some groups that are, for example, pretty much on par, and some groups or classes of employees that are below market value. So there might be some real differential changes that are needed, but you did this calculation to give a ballpark of what the impacts would be at these different average levels?
Madam Chair, yes. Yeah. Since it was such a wide range of positions,
Sure.
there's really no way to know, other than we did get a preliminary analysis for one of our divisions, and for that specific division, we had employees who were $7 lower than market value. So that may be the extreme, and we may see other positions that what we're paying now does match market, but that study will definitely provide that information to us, and then we could take a look and see exactly who's being impacted, what that total cost will be, and then bring to the board some potential proposals as to how we actually then attack that project.
Excellent. Thanks. And I appreciate getting the ranges, because you can at least ballpark in what averages might be. Manager Miller.
So, Madam Chair, that's going to be, one of the priority areas. And I think, as we bring back recommendations to the board, one of the things that we want to make sure, I think probably one of the biggest challenges facing the county right now is attracting and retaining staff. So obviously compensation and benefits has got to be one of our primary focuses in order to make sure we're not just competitive, but we're seen as an attractive place to come be employed and to stay employed. So I think, and the other thing that we did in the 5 agreements that we did, I think we did it in all 5 of them. If not, it was 4 of the 5 of them, there's a provision while they've been negotiated, they're negotiated with pay scales, but that they would, instead of a whole new economic reopener, at least for a couple of years, they would just get whatever the COLA is. So we have to keep in mind that, so if the board approves the COLA for the county, it would be the same COLA for them as well, for our public safety unions, because the class and comp study did not include the public safety unions. It only included AFSCME, blue collar, and all the non-union positions. So there's keeping this balance between what we put financially into the, of recurring into the COLA, and then into rectifying the class and comp. Obviously, if it came back that everybody was at least 5% below, you know, and you said, okay, well, then if you did COLAs, you could bring all those people who were covered by the class and comp study up with a COLA, and then you may only be looking at having to make a small adjustment to get them to market. So this is going to be the balance in when we get that study, balancing, rectifying some positions that may be significantly lower than market, with also compensating the entire county staff with a COLA that keeps us competitive for all the negotiations we just completed.
Excellent. So are there questions? Yeah, okay. Commissioner Garcia? But, and let's keep them specifically to
Yes,
this.
thank you. I know this is it. We're not approving the budget, correct? We're just acting this informational item. Thank you. And in regards to the, thank you, Madam Chair, in regards to the comp study, who actually performed the comp study for all the different employees?
A company called Keystone International that HR contracted with.
All right, good. And then, well, before I get, Madam Chair, if it's appropriate, I would like Sheriff Mendoza, if he actually would like to get up and speak as into what he feels about.
Let's go by the,
Okay, that's fine.
by the agenda, please.
And then in regards to the Sheriff's Department for employee professional development for $71,000, what does that mean?
Chair Hamilton, Commissioner Garcia, that's just different certifications and training opportunities that the Sheriff's Office is planning to or would like to do next year based upon their existing personnel as well as any new positions that they're able to fill and do the appropriate certifications that are required. I believe like for weapons, I'm not sure what other, I'm not sure if I remember any of the other trainings other than. So there will be trainings to maintain their certifications as a sheriff.
And thank you, Madam Chair. And in regards to the patrol vehicles, which I'm all for public safety, we all are. But so the $2.8 million, don't we budget for that every single year, like $3 million, or that's a whole, that's a brand new budget item?
Chair Hamilton, Commissioner Garcia, no, it's a reoccurring request. I believe that they have what I would call like some kind of cascading as far as vehicles that are older. They would want to replace those with the newer ones. And when they replace those, they also include all the equipment, the lights, the decals, everything needed to actually, when a sheriff walks up to that car, it's ready for them to drive off and go do patrolling.
Understood. Thank you, Madam Chair. And also in regards to the film office, in regards to the $310,000, that's for promotion. What is that for?
Chair Hamilton, Commissioner Garcia, that's the film office that you're referring to?
Yes.
That is the film office's budget in order to promote Santa Fe County in the film industry based upon the different TV shows that we have here in the county, as well as training and as well as conferences for the staff to go learn about the film industry and how to bring them back here to the county versus, let's say, Albuquerque.
And thank you. And then also on page 18, in regards to the contracts to feed the homeless, who's going to oversee that? Is it Community Services Department or Healthcare Assistance?
Chair Hamilton, Commissioner Garcia, page 18.
So I think some of that is listed under the group that manages it. So,
Which contract again, I'm sorry, sir?
Madam Chair, I just want to make sure that whenever we're going through our budget process and we're creating our budget, that we actually have the additional or needed staff so we can take care of all these proposed items. That's right.
well,
All of the
Also-
department,
Sorry, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Sorry, Mrs. Edeta, but in regards to page 18, we have $2 million for behavioral health. And so do we actually have the staff to actually oversee our behavioral health stuff?
so I think I'd like to point out that these are the highlights.
Yes.
And these are the higher level balances between revenues, expenses, and then the highlights of what are contributing to those. But I think at the beginning, they indicated that we will be going into more details as these are refined, and so that balance
Yes, Madam.
will be obvious.
Yes, Madam Chair, I appreciate that, but we're going to be going through these in the next 2 weeks, so I just wanted to see what these details are. That's why I'm asking about it. And so, just as long as we have the staff, because this is a great budget proposal, I understand, but just as long as we have the staff that can actually produce it, right? That's where I'm going with it. You don't have to answer the question.
Okay.
But in regards to page 23, as Manager Miller said, in the budget for road maintenance, $7.4 million, that actually is, that money is actually for proposed roads to get roads redone and renewed, right? Kendrick.
Chair Hamilton, Commissioner Garcia, yes, that's for the road maintenance, any new roads. That would be outside of any additional money that they potentially get from DOT from grants that would be accounted for in a different fund. So this would be specifically for any activity that the county does that we would record in Fund 204, or sorry, the road fund.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Mrs. Herrera, so you actually will give us a list of those roads that are on the request for the $7.4 million from Public Works?
I can check with Public Works. I don't believe, within the request, they didn't actually specify the specific roads that they'd work on. Their request includes the salary benefits as well as like the maintenance costs, so for the road materials, for rental of any equipment that the county may not have, for any supplies that they needed to do to be on the road day to day, as well as I'm trying to think of what else was in any contractual labor that they may need, as well as I think between salary benefits, the maintenance costs, like the road material, any kind of rental for machines. I think that's pretty much the bulk of that budget. But we can definitely follow up with Public Works to ask if they have a plan for what roads do they plan to attack next year.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And in regards to the BDD, the Utility Department Operation and Maintenance is about $2.3 million. I understand this is just, you're bringing this forward as an informational item, but I guess my question for that is how much is the city of Santa Fe putting in for that? Because we both share the BDD. Those are just questions I'm going to ask you when we come
Well,
back, okay?
okay, so definitely BDD is done by
I just want to make sure that,
agreement, yeah.
I understand. And I know Manager Miller understands, but I just want to make sure that we're sharing the cost with the, I get it. Those are the questions I went for. And in regards, thank you, Madam Chair, in regards to the classification and compensation studies, I appreciate you all coming forward and assisting, whether it's public safety or our road crew or anybody else out there, as into to what we need to do to assist our employees with more compensation for whether it's retirement and whether it's for healthcare. But thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I think I'm going to ask that level of detail that's anticipated to be developed over the next few weeks, that we move forward with the agenda. Manager Miller?
Madam Chair, if there are things we don't typically list every contract, we've got hundreds of millions of dollars of expenditures in the budget, so we don't do that. If there are certain areas that the board would like to see more detail on, obviously we can present that, and maybe in community services, community development, growth management, some of those contracts, we could make a list for the next presentation, but these are contracts, for instance, all of that is what we've been doing through Connect. And most of those contracts are all brought to you every time we amend them and add funding to them. So I just would, I would say, don't anticipate that we would present to the board the hundreds of pages of the detail that go with each department's budget requests for each contract. So
I totally understand that, and I would suggest that if there are commissioners that have particular associated requests, they be handled separately. I was just trying to kind of acknowledge that and recognize that this is the overview that's giving us the basis for the way budget's going to move forward, and that if there are more specific things, they can be provided and not presented at the level of detail here, but be provided in a paper copy or an electronic copy, maybe before the budget meeting or after, before final approval. And recognizing that also we get lots of these details as pieces during the year, so.
okay, thank you, Madam Chair. And then just in the interest of trying to expedite the rest of the presentation, because I know you have the regular board meeting, the next 2 pages are FTE requests. We have not gone through a detailed analysis of the FTE requests. Like I said, these will compete with the recurring, other recurring expenditures for COLAs, for insurance, for the compensation and classification study. So we are having internally HR, finance manager's office with the departments going through their requests, having them present the data that indicates their need for the positions, and justification for those positions before we make a recommendation to the board which positions we think are the top priority to fund in the next fiscal year. And then also the next slide 31 shows you where the funding source would come from. Predominantly, they are general fund, but some of them are from the EMS. And second 1/8 of GRT, which is the healthcare and EMS GRT. That's just information. I'm not asking for any decisions, just letting you know that's how it breaks out, where the funding would come from if all those positions were funded. The other thing we need to do is we need to look at those requests in line with the compensation classification study. Those are based on current ranges and current pay, and we'd have to look and see is the request adequate based upon what comes out of the study. Then the next 2 slides are our fixed asset requests. We received $17.8 million in total fixed asset replacement, renewal, replacement, or new equipment requests. Some have been revised already. Either the departments have voluntarily removed or said that or prioritized their requests and stated that they could put off some of those to a future year. So right now what we're looking at is about $16 million in the fixed asset requests. And then that next page tells you based upon the request, not based upon recommended funding, just where the funds would need to come from for those, whether it would be general fund, clerk's fees, federal grants, GRT, property tax, state grants, or utilities for that total $17.8 million. And then the next chart shows what the categories are. So equipment, office equipment and furnishings, $5.6 million. IT-related requests of $3.5 million. Vehicle requests of close to $8.2 million. And then other requests of about close to $500,000. So, but we do believe we'll be able to fund quite a bit of those requests because as we showed you, the revenues and expenditures estimated at the end of FY '22. Anything that falls out of the budget is what we then allocate towards purchasing our capital requests. And we're just in frozen positions and vacancies. We're looking at over $5 million in salary savings and $8.5 million in capital requests. And a lot of that was driven by the fact that stuff isn't available this year. So departments found that they had budget to go acquire equipment, but no vendors able to provide that equipment. So we anticipate some of the requests for this year to roll into next year along with that budget, as well as new requests using funds that we did not end up using this year due to the inability. And then other funding for capital requests of around $9 million. Then the last bit of this, just we know from the legislature we'll have a couple of impacts. There is a law in 2020, Chapter 11, that enacted 4 0.5% contribution rate increases for para. So that's retirement contributions for a total cumulative increase over the next 4 years of 2% for the employer and for the employee. That additional 2% that the employee has to carry does not automatically get the 75% pickup that we have in our current contributions. That would be a decision that would have to be made by the Board of County Commissioners. But no matter what, we have to come up with our 0.5%, which Yvonne covered in an earlier slide. And that is, I want to say, around $400,000. And so depending on, and then what we do on the employee side could have an additional impact. And then the last slides are, you've seen those slides numerous times before. Just letting you know that's what we had decided with the $29.2 million that the county received in ARPA funds. We did receive 14.6 of it already, which has been allocated. $6 million to revenue replacement. So far, $4 million last year's, and then $4 million next year for infrastructure, and then there was quite a bit in there for $1.5 million for economic development, $2 million for housing, behavioral health $1.5 million, Connect programs of $3 million, and we would just be establishing the budget for the second half of that as well. As Yvonne stated in the earlier presentation, that we have not seen a lot of expenditure on that yet. We did put the $1.5 million towards the lamplighter out of the housing. We have adjusted a lot of the Connect contracts, and they are starting to spend that. So the contracts have been adjusted, but the payments haven't. But those, and then some of the behavioral health as well. But we anticipate recording a lot more expenditures going forward because we've gotten through the procurement on several of those items. And with that, I stand for questions.
Thank you. I'd like to keep the questions to an absolute minimum, and just encourage everybody to realize that in these last section of pages, there's a lot of detail that we can study individually in preparation for the next meeting. And I wanted to indicate for the record that Commissioner Roybal has been able to join us for about the last 15 minutes. Is there closing information?
Madam
There's
Chair.
an item that's discussion of commissioner priorities, but is that something that we have next steps?
Madam Chair, so our next steps we've just completed our initial discussion of the budget, the revenue projections as of today or the last couple of weeks, as well as the department requests. We'll be looking for a second buddies second budget study session, not buddy, at which point we would be looking for any direction from the board, as well as any additional priorities that you may have. We still have to look at capital projects for the year, for fiscal year '23, as well as the issue that we're seeing with increased costs and the impact to the current year budgets. And then after that second budget study session, we would then develop that interim budget to present to the board so that we can have that approved in May to submit to DFA. And with that, Chair, stand for any additional questions the board may have.
Thank you. Capital budget is during the second budget study session, the end of April? Or it comes after, doesn't it?
Madam Chair, we, finance and projects and other departments still need to analyze the capital projects
Yes.
so that we can then bring that list to the board.
Right, got it. Thank you. Are there other questions at the moment? Seeing none. Yvonne or Manager Miller, is there?
Madam Chair, so as I said, this was all just to give you the preliminary of information where we are. I anticipate the next study session having a lot more specifics and decision points. I don't know if there is anything that the board would like to see. I understand Commissioner Garcia would like to see a little more information on our health services contracts and homeless initiatives. Is there anything else from any of the other board members that you would like to see?
Well, not even to put the commissioners on the spot. I think if you have something in mind right now, otherwise, if things occur in the next week, because our next study session is 2 weeks from now, perhaps it could be handled by email or direct contact as well. So I appreciate that question.
And Madam Chair, what we typically do also when we give you the next, when is in our recommendations, we tell you more specifics of what's funded, what's recommended in that recommendation.
Absolutely.
Along the line of what were some of the big things in those departments. We come back also and highlight what we're recommending and how that ties to the strategic plan.
That sounds great.
And then also, I'd just like to let you know, we do have lunch for you if you'd like to take a 15, 20-minute break before you start the regular BCC meeting.
I was planning on doing that. I have one other quick question for Attorney Schaefer. We do have it on the agenda to ask for public comment. Do we want to see if there's anybody online, or is that something that's not necessarily requisite at this time?
Madam Chair, since it was placed on the agenda, I would go ahead and do it with the expectation that the public comment would be limited to the budget and any preliminary
Absolutely.
feedback that the public may want to provide.
Thank you so much. So is there anybody present or online who would like to speak to the board about the budget issues that were raised today? And to expedite this, Daniel, do you know if anybody appears to be on the WebEx that has indicated a desire to speak?
Madam Chair, I do not see anything indicating anyone wants to speak during this meeting.
Thank you so much, Daniel. So I'm going to go ahead and close public comment. Is there any concluding business announcements? If not, I want to indicate that, first of all, that I really appreciate that the staff kept this to the expected 2-hour program. I really appreciate your efforts. We're 12 minutes late because I started the meeting 12 minutes late, and I really apologize for that delay and really appreciate everybody hanging in there. And I would say we would reconvene at 2:35. That'll give us 20 minutes, a good 20 minutes to have a break.
Madam Chair,
Thank you, Commissioner Hanson.
I move to adjourn.
Thank you so much.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We stand adjourned until 2:35 when we will do the regular BCC meeting.